tax what we eat, we tax what we earn, but we don't tax jet fuel. That is bizarre. That's the view of Europe's new climate commissioner. And I'm joined now to discuss his comments by Oisin Coughlan, CEO of Friends of the Earth, and Eoghan Corry, owner and editor of Travel Extra. I'm going to come to you first, Oisin. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I mean, the headline itself is, his quote, is sort of almost self-evident when you realise that we don't tax jet fuel. We tax all other forms of fuel for cars and shipping and all our fuels that we buy in our homes and businesses. But we don't tax jet fuel. It's an artefact of an international deal from years ago. But it doesn't make sense. It isn't fair. At the very least, there should be a level playing field between all these forms of polluting transports as we try to shift away from fossil fuels, as was agreed at the COP last December. And there has been an effort inside the European Union over the last couple of years to introduce a tax inside Europe, at least, on aviation fuel. It stalled last year because it requires unanimity among all 27 member states because it's a tax matter, and they couldn't get it over the line, particularly with, as it's fair to say, actually starting in the country of this man whose name I think is Wopke Hoekstra, the Dutch commissioner, yes, where they had a backlash from farmers in particular. So there's a lot more, with the European elections coming up, a lot more nervousness among political leaders. They did a lot of stuff in this European term around climate, but they haven't had the political will or the agreement to move this one forward. But it leaves us in an unfair situation. Let
me bring in Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, do you agree? Do you think this should happen? Do you think this will happen?
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen. I think it's a non-runner. It means unravelling a major international agreement, the Chicago Convention, 1944. Big deal to get 200 countries to sign out, airlines from around the world to sign up to something, and the governments to sign up. And since it's been signed, by the way, there's nothing new about this. There's always been countries who want to shake down the aviation industry for money, usually countries that run into some sort of financial problem, or poorer countries saying, why don't we tax aviation? What they have are looking at is unravelling an agreement which has all sorts of other elements in it, including a very important safety element. But there is an alternative which the politicians of the world have happily been doing. It's to put tax on other aspects of aviation. 33% of the airfare you pay at the moment goes in tax. In some cases, for a sail fare, for instance, some of the sail fares for Aer Lingus, the airline is getting a fraction of what the governments are getting on both sides in taxes. Taxing of fuel is a little bit of a red herring, because if you're going to unravel a major international agreement like the Chicago Convention, be careful of what comes round and hits you in the back of the head.
Oisin, is that a fair point? That we're already taxing other aspects of flying, so there is a flying tax, as it were. Well, it just isn't applied to the fuel.
It's very variable, and it depends on where you are. Whereas the European idea, is to have a tax across Europe, a minimum standard of tax across Europe on aviation fuel, which would be a lot fairer and keep the level playing field. Because I think there was a proposal, for example, to do it just inside the European Union, perhaps to avoid some of the implications that Eoghan was mentioning. But that would put Europe at a disadvantage to others. So I think it's one thing is worth mentioning is that Eamon Ryan, as part of his role inside the European Union at the COP in December, the UN climate talks, had a mandate to get into the text an agreement in the text of the UN agreement on climate that they should look at the polluter pays principle at international level around things like aviation and shipping. And okay, the Chicago Convention exists, but it's decades before Paris, before the climate crisis. You can't just say that's written in stone and we can never examine it again.
Domestic flights, you're allowed, if you wish, because that's all within your own jurisdiction,
absolutely,
put tax on those things. One country's done it, and then they undid it.
Yeah, well, because it's seen as being an unfair advantage on other countries. Would Eoghan be in favour of the Irish government putting a tax on fuel just in Ireland?
Eoghan?
And I'm just reflecting really what the aviation industry is saying, but I think that if it's going to be done, it has to be done not by the European Union, but by the 200 countries of the world together. And as we know from the COPs, and I was at a few of them, I wasn't at the last one, getting 200 countries to sign up to something like this would be, it's a big deal. It's
not and why would it have to be done by the 200 countries of the Chicago Convention? Why wouldn't the 27 countries within the EU just do it?
Chicago Convention was signed by fewer countries at the time, but because it's a worldwide agreement that you don't put tax on aviation fuel.
Okay, so you can't have one without the other. Is that fair enough, Oisin? We would have to undo something that would have all sorts of implications. and we are able to tax flying in other ways.
Well, look, we have to transform every sector of our economy and our society over the next 10, 15 years, and aviation can't escape. It's unfair on the other sectors. We're seeing already, interestingly, in Ireland, farmers coming out and saying, how come we have to reduce our emissions by 25% and the government is talking in favour of Dublin Airport increasing its emissions by 20% or more. So we have to all do our share. And if aviation was a country, it would be the 6th most polluting country in the world.
Is that emissions. Fair, Eoghan? Would you say that other sectors look at aviation and go, this isn't fair on us?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the efforts by some people to put the farming and aviation communities at each other's throats about this. The reality is that aviation is a consumer of fuel. It's interesting that one of the countries that's lecturing Ireland about closing down two things we do well, food protection and aviation, we're very strong internationally on both, is opening a coal mine, a new coal mine, open cast, while pointing the finger at us. Aviation is a consumer of fuel. If there was some other alternative, they would buy it. There isn't. The production of SAF, the way Europe has fallen way behind in the production of sustainable aviation fuel, is really it comes with its problems, but they should be at least ramping things up rather than saying to aviation, you're burning too much fuel, you're responsible for too many emissions, 2% of the world's emissions, by the way, and then not giving them the alternative. They would happily run to any alternative. They are doing what they can. They have, unusually for a major international industry, have signed up all their members, all their airline members, to deliver net zero by 2050, and there are various ways they're going to do that. Two Irishmen to the head of that.
The EU proposal was actually to give a tax break to the production of new and innovative fuels while taxing the polluting fuel. That's the kind of incentive that we need to move things forward.
I'm going to leave this one here, but before I let you go, Eoghan, I wanted to ask you a question. I don't know if you saw in the papers this morning, holidaymakers going to face higher airfares this summer because of capacity constraints. So says Michael O'Leary. This is to do with the fact that we don't have as many planes because of issues around Boeing.
Yeah, we came close to 100%. We came back to close to pre-pandemic levels last year. It's certainly clear that the supply of seats is not going to match the demand this summer. A couple of reasons for that. Airbus are being grounded, not so much Aer Lingus, they're an Airbus airline, but Lufthansa, others are being affected because of an engine recall, and Boeing aren't able to produce the Boeing MAX in the numbers that they can for safety reasons, and as they were behind anyway. That's going to leave, Ryanair would have anticipated 57 new aircraft by summer. They're going to get 40 odd of those. It means we're going to have fewer seats than we have demand for them. It's a very raw supply and demand situation. When supply outstrips demand, prices go down. When demand outstrips supply, prices go up. That's what's happening this summer.
It certainly appears we're not losing our appetite for flying, though, despite any concerns around climate. Look, thank you both very much for speaking to us this